Opening scene, the whisper of shadows. Darkness. A black screen stretches infinitely, untouched by light, a void where time itself seems to hesitate. A low hum vibrates at the edge of perception, not sound, but a sensation crawling beneath the skin, burrowing into the mind. Then a flicker, a whisper, not one, but many, layered, indistinct. Some are soft, pleading, others insistent, urgent, panicked. Fragments of voices barely graspable, as if speaking from across centuries, trapped between reality and something else. The static rises a distant hiss, clicking, shifting before condensing into a single voice. It is not calm. It is not rehearsed. It trembles, weighed down by something too immense, too terrifying for words alone. Daniel Turner, VO. Forget everything you think you know about history. The screen glitches a sharp distortion, like a transmission struggling to hold itself together. The truth is far stranger, far darker. The darkness begins to lift, not abruptly but subtly. Shapes emerge, blurry, flickering. A room. A single lamp casts a weak, flickering glow over a study, its golden light failing to chase away the creeping shadows that press at its edges. The air inside is thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. Stacks of books, their spines cracked with age, are piled haphazardly across a wooden desk, their titles worn away by time. Loose papers, filled with cryptic notes and symbols, are scattered between them. Maps, classified documents, faded photographs of objects that should not exist. In the middle of the chaos, a single monitor glows. And there, sitting before it, Daniel Turner. His face is gaunt, eyes hollowed by nights without sleep, weeks without peace. He looks as if he has been running not just from men, but from truths he was never meant to know. His hands are unsteady, his breath slow, deliberate, controlled, but his expression is not one of fear. It is resolve. He leans forward, the dim light catching the sharp angles of his face, and stares directly into the camera. Daniel Turner, low, measured. I was there. A faint beep sounds from the monitor beside him. Data scrolls across the screen, lines of encrypted code dissolving and reforming into something far more chilling. A single date, a single name, and beneath it, an image. A figure, tall, indistinct, not human. The screen glitches violently. Daniel doesn't flinch. I saw it all. The shadows in the room seem to deepen. The faint outline of a red blinking light, a recording device, can be seen in the corner of the bookshelf, watching him. Someone is listening. Someone is always listening. Daniel inhales sharply, pushing past whatever invisible weight presses against him. Daniel Turner, softer, urgent. And before they find me, you need to know the truth. The screen distorts again, but this time it does not recover. A violent rupture in the transmission, a burst of white noise, pixels breaking apart into meaningless static. Then, a flash. London, Buckingham Palace, a month before the Queen's death. And in that moment, before the memory fully takes form, there is something else. A shape in the static. Watching, waiting, then darkness. Scene 1. The obsession of a monarch. The corridors of Buckingham Palace stretched endlessly, their grand arches and ornate tapestries whispering of centuries past. The air inside was still almost too still. The world outside saw the Queen as an unshakable matriarch, the embodiment of British tradition and control. But inside these walls, behind closed doors, there was a different reality. Daniel Turner stood at his usual post, eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway. His job was simple: observe, protect, report. And yet, over the years, he had learned that the most dangerous threats were not always those that could be seen. Beyond the thick wooden doors of her study, Queen Elizabeth II sat at her desk, bathed in the glow of a single brass lamp. The flickering light cast elongated shadows, making her frail frame seem almost ghostly against the heavy, carved oak. But her eyes, sharp, calculating, betrayed a mind that had not aged with her body. Before her lay a thick, weathered file labeled Project Albion. Its edges were creased, pages dog-eared from years of handling. Maps, transcripts, grainy black and white photographs of unidentified crafts, impossible shapes suspended mid-air, some with strange glyphs etched onto their hulls. Reports detailing encounters, blurred images of creatures that should not exist. Daniel VO. She wasn't just a figurehead. She knew things that would break the minds of ordinary people. I was assigned to protect her. But in truth, I was watching her. Because she was obsessed with them. The Queen reached for the telephone, her fingers moving with purpose. Daniel shifted slightly, positioning himself closer, though he knew she would not acknowledge his presence. Queen Elizabeth II, whispering, "Orford Ness, we need another visit. Time is running out." Her voice was barely audible, but there was an urgency beneath it, something different this time. Not curiosity, not duty, something else. Daniel's posture stiffened. He had escorted her to Orford Ness before. A desolate, forgotten piece of England's coast, cloaked in rumors of secret tests and Cold War experiments. But there had always been something unspoken about those visits. Tonight, though, her tone sent a chill through him. Was it fear? Was it excitement? He wasn't sure. Scene 2. The Forbidden Meeting. A convoy of sleek, black vehicles cut through the night like silent phantoms, their headlights dimmed as they navigated the desolate roads. The journey was long, the landscape shifting from urban sprawl to endless, windswept marshland. The air grew heavier, charged with something unseen, an invisible force pressing against the skin. Orford Ness, a place that existed in whispers, a place where the ordinary rules of the world seemed to fray at the edges. As they arrived, the waves crashed against the distant shoreline, their rhythmic, ceaseless assault adding to the eerie stillness. The structures here were old abandoned military bunkers from a forgotten war, their concrete walls now cracked and weathered. But Daniel knew this place had never truly been abandoned. The convoy came to a stop. The Queen stepped out first, her breath visible in the cold night air. Despite her age, she walked with the same regal certainty as always. But Daniel could see it now, her hands, curled slightly at her sides. The slightest tremor. Something awaited them. Inside the bunker, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something else, something metallic. The dim overhead lights flickered slightly, as though struggling against an unseen force. Waiting in the shadows were Sir Geoffrey Hunt and Dr. Avery. Sir Geoffrey was a man whose presence alone commanded attention, aged, stooped, but with eyes that burned like embers. His voice, when he spoke, was like gravel being crushed underfoot. Sir Geoffrey Hunt, low, urgent. "We don't have much time, Your Majesty." "They know you're listening." Dr. Avery stood beside him, a thin man with hollow eyes and the nervous energy of someone who had seen too much. Papers lay scattered across the metal table, between them diagrams, readings, images of symbols that twisted the mind if stared at for too long. Dr. Avery, voice trembling. "The transmissions have intensified. We are no longer observers, Your Majesty. We are participants." "They know." A long silence followed. The Queen's expression did not waver, but Daniel could see something shifting beneath her composed exterior. Queen Elizabeth II, grimly. "Then we must be ready. If we are to keep our world safe, we need to understand them." Daniel felt the air shift. The temperature dropped just slightly, but enough to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Then it happened. A sound, not a normal sound, not one that belonged in this world. It was a low hum, deep enough that it was felt rather than heard. The walls seemed to vibrate, the very ground beneath them shuddering as though some great force had awakened. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He turned sharply, stepping toward the entrance. Outside, the night sky distorted. Something was there, something vast, something that should not exist. Above the facility, a craft hovered. It was triangular, almost liquid-like in its construction. Black, yet reflecting no light, as if absorbing the very essence of the space around it. 3 faint, rotating lights marked its edges, moving in a way that defied physics. The silence was deafening except for that hum. That unbearable, stomach-twisting hum. Daniel reached for his weapon, but he already knew. It was useless. His fingers twitched against the grip, but he could not move. The Queen stood beside him, staring up at the impossible shape above them. And for the first time in all his years of serving her, Daniel saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. Not fear. Not awe. Recognition. Daniel Vio. That was the first time I saw it with my own eyes. The technology, it wasn't human. And neither were they. The craft remained suspended for a moment longer, defying all known laws of gravity. And then, without warning, it was gone, vanishing into the void as though it had never been there at all. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sir Geoffrey turned to the Queen, his face pale. Sir Jeffrey Hunt, voice tight, almost a whisper. It has begun. The Queen said nothing. She simply nodded. And in that nod, Daniel understood. She had been waiting for this moment all along. Scene 3, the Queen's warning. The heavy drapes of Buckingham Palace barely let in the dim afternoon light, casting long shadows across the ornate chamber. The scent of aged paper and faintly burning candle wax lingered in the air, mixing with something else, something more elusive. A tension that could not be named, but was undeniably there. Queen Elizabeth II sat in her chair, her once steadfast posture now slightly diminished by time, yet her presence remained unshakable. The lines on her face were deeper, her hands thinner, but her eyes they burned with an intensity that defied age. There was no resignation in them, only urgency. The fire in the grand hearth crackled, but Daniel barely heard it. He stood at his usual post, a silent observer, yet tonight felt different. The air in the room was heavier, charged, as if something unseen lingered just beyond perception. The Queen turned her gaze toward him, studying him as if making a decision that had long weighed upon her. Then, she spoke, her voice low, deliberate. Queen Elizabeth II, softly, almost to herself. They will not wait much longer. Her fingers trailed over the edge of her desk, where a stack of letters lay, all marked with the insignia of the Ministry of Defense. The wax seals had been broken. She had read them all. She took a slow breath. Queen Elizabeth II, grimly. We promised them something, but the deal was broken. And now, the consequences are coming. Daniel felt a chill trickle down his spine. A deal? What had she promised? Before he could find the words to ask, a sharp knock broke the silence. The door creaked open, and Sir Jeffrey Hunt stepped inside. His face was pale, drawn, as if he had seen something he could not unsee. His hands clenched at his sides, a rare crack in his usual composed demeanor. Sir Jeffrey, urgent, to the Queen. It's happening. They know. We must act now. For the first time, Daniel saw something flicker in the Queen's expression, a moment of hesitation, a calculation of risk. And then, in an instant, she made her decision. With a surprising agility for her age, she turned toward her desk and reached beneath the polished mahogany. With a soft click, a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a worn leather-bound file. Its pages were thick with age, the edges brittle, yet the weight it carried was far heavier than its form. She took it in both hands and extended it to Daniel. He hesitated. Queen Elizabeth II, softly, but with command. If something happens to me, you must take this. The truth cannot die with me. Her hands lingered for a moment as he took the file. A quiet understanding passed between them. Whatever was inside this file, it was never meant to see the light of day. And yet, now, it was his burden to bear. Scene 4, the cover-up. 1 week later, a somber hush had settled over Buckingham Palace. The usual hum of servants and officials had given way to something heavier, grief, or something close to it. Queen Elizabeth II was dead. Drapes of black silk hung from the grand windows. The world mourned. Flags were lowered. Tributes were spoken. Yet beneath the official ceremonies, something else stirred, something that Daniel could feel in his bones. Something was wrong. The air inside the palace no longer felt like home. It felt like a cage. Daniel stood in his small quarters, staring at the file he had been given. He had hidden it, buried it beneath layers of false compartments. But even so, he felt watched. He had been careful, and yet his phone clicked when he answered it. Faint static whispered in his ear when no one was speaking. At first, he told himself it was paranoia, until he noticed the cars. At first, it was only one black, nondescript, always parked just far enough to seem casual. Then there were 2. Then 3. They never stayed long, but they were always there. Daniel had been trained to notice patterns, to see the subtle things others missed. And everything in him told him one thing. He was being hunted. Then came the night that erased all doubt. Rain hammered against the city streets as Daniel drove through the quiet back roads of London, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The file sat in the passenger seat beside him, wrapped in a simple brown envelope, a meaningless disguise for something that could change the course of history. His pulse quickened as he caught sight of the headlights in his rearview mirror. Too close. He pressed his foot against the accelerator. The car behind him matched his speed. A shiver of cold certainty ran through him. They weren't following him. They were hunting him. Then impact. A violent jolt sent his car skidding. The tires screamed against the wet asphalt. He fought for control, but before he could regain balance, another hit. Harder. The guardrail loomed in his periphery. A moment of weightlessness as the car lurched, flipping downward into the darkness below. The world became a blur of twisting metal and shattered glass. Then stillness. The scent of gasoline. The soft hissing of steam. The distant wail of sirens that would never come in time. Daniel's vision blurred as he struggled to breathe, his body aching with the sharp sting of impact and betrayal. Above him, through the rain-streaked windshield, he could just barely make out the silhouette of a figure standing at the edge of the road. Watching, waiting, and then they were gone. Daniel's fingers fumbled weakly for the envelope beside him. It was gone. The file. Taken. His entire body tensed with the crushing realization. They had planned this. Every step. Every moment. The Queen was dead. The truth had been buried. And now, they were coming for him. Scene 5. The hunt begins. The alleyway was a fracture in the city's bones, narrow, damp, suffocating. The only light came from a flickering neon sign above a forgotten shopfront, casting sickly colors onto the glistening pavement below. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with something else: anticipation. Daniel's breath was slow, measured, his heartbeat anything but. He had been followed. He was sure of it. Every footstep behind him, every sudden stop at a red light, every unfamiliar face lingering too long in the reflection of a storefront window. He wasn't imagining it. And yet, Richard had reached out. A name Daniel hadn't heard in years. A ghost. A whisper from his past in military intelligence, now resurfacing in the dead of night. Daniel leaned against the damp brick wall, eyes scanning the darkness. No one else. Not yet. Then movement. A figure emerged from the shadows at the alley's far end, dressed in a long coat, his face shrouded beneath the low brim of a hat. He walked with purpose, but not haste, the kind of stride only men who had spent their lives dodging death carried. Richard. He stopped a few paces away, his breath visible in the cold air. His face was worn, weathered like stone left out in a storm for too long. His eyes piercing, tired, but still sharp. Richard, grimly. You were never supposed to know. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. But now that you do, there's no turning back. They are cleaning up. You're on the list. Daniel's fingers tensed at his sides. He didn't need to ask who they were. He already knew. Richard pulled something from the inner folds of his coat, a small, unassuming USB drive, barely the length of a thumb. He held it between two fingers, as if it weighed far more than its size suggested. Richard, pressing it into Daniel's hand. Project Albion wasn't just about sightings. It was a deal. And now, the dead is due. Daniel stared down at the drive. They're coming back. His stomach twisted. And they're not happy. A gust of wind howled through the alley, rattling loose debris, sending a distant can rolling into the dark. A warning. A signal. A countdown. By the time Daniel looked up, Richard was already gone, vanished into the night like a shadow that had never truly been there. But in Daniel's palm, the truth remained. A small, insignificant piece of plastic. But inside it, proof. Transcripts. Classified reports. Footage that no human should have ever seen. The Queen knew. And now, so did he. Scene 6. The final warning. The single exposed light bulb above Daniel's desk buzzed softly, casting a dim, flickering glow over the cramped, cluttered hideout. Old newspapers, documents, maps, a wall of connections, and red string covered one side of the room. Notes scrawled in sharp ink marked dates, locations. Orford Ness. Buckingham Palace. Area 51. The air smelled of dust and cold metal. The kind of air that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. A camera sat in front of him, its red recording light blinking, waiting. Daniel exhaled slowly, his fingers tight against the wooden desk, knuckles white. He had faced death before. War. Betrayal. The unknown. But never like this. He pressed record. Daniel Turner, determined, to camera. This is bigger than any of us. A pause. A steadying breath. They silenced the Queen. His eyes darkened. They tried to silence me. Another pause. A shift in the air. But the truth is out now. And if I disappear, you'll know why. A noise outside. Daniel's spine stiffened, his ears straining. A rustle. Soft footsteps. The unmistakable creak of a floorboard just beyond the door. His breath caught. A shadow passed against the frosted window, a silhouette. Someone was there. He turned off the camera. The room plunged into silence. His hand hovered over his sidearm. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. If they had come for him, it was already too late. The window pane shuddered. Daniel took one last breath, steadying himself. Then darkness. Closing scene, the reckoning. Far above Earth, beyond the thin veil of atmosphere, something stirred in the void. A vessel vast, silent, unknowable hung against the endless darkness. It was not like any human-made craft. No rivets, no seams, no visible propulsion. It did not reflect light, nor did it absorb it. It simply was. Inside, the air was thick with an unnatural energy, an almost liquid stillness that defied human understanding. The walls pulsed faintly, not metal, not organic, but something in between. The room, if it could be called that, was vast yet without edges, stretching into infinity in ways the mind could not fully grasp. A screen, or was it a membrane, shimmered before an unseen presence. Upon its surface, the grainy image of a man flickered in and out of existence. Daniel Turner. His face was frozen in the final moments of his message. His voice desperate, defiant, trembling with the weight of revelation. They silenced the Queen. They tried to silence me. But the truth is out now. And if I disappear, you'll know why. The image distorted for a moment, then froze. A shape loomed before it, tall, unnatural, watching. The being had no clear form, no face as humans understood it. Only a shifting mass of dark geometry, angles that bent in ways that should not exist. From its form extended a single hand long, skeletal, clawed. It hovered over the glowing control panel before it. The light beneath its fingers trembled, shifting between colors unseen by human eyes, pulsing in silent calculation. The room was filled with a deep, resonant hum, not a sound, but a feeling, something that pressed against the skin, against the soul. Then a voice, not human, not of this world. It did not echo. It did not vibrate in the air. It simply was, as if the words were placed directly into the fabric of existence itself. A single command. Unknown entity, in an unearthly tone. Begin. The screen blinked out of existence. The light on the control panel faded to black. Outside the craft, the stars themselves seemed to shift, as if something ancient had awakened from its slumber. And then, in the vast silence of the cosmos, it moved.